Hey y'all. So last time we talked about historical causes of diffusion. Now let's move on to contemporary causes of diffusion. So, just like last time, one of the underlying themes of this chapter includes that cultural ideas, practices, and innovations change or even disappear over time. So before or by the end of this video, you should be able to explain how contemporary processes impact current cultural patterns. At the end, we'll go ahead and read through these two essential learning points as a way to summarize some of the ideas that we are looking at today. So hopefully y'all really remember this graph here, distance decay. When talking about contemporary causes of cultural diffusion, distance decay is one of the underlying ideas of this. So historically, due to distance decay as well as friction of distance, closer groups of people were more alike than groups that were further from each other. So this is more true historically. Now we have space-time compression, which we'll get to in just a moment. But this underlying idea where you have groups of people that maybe speaks the same language, maybe just different dialects, in geographic proximity makes sense, right? That distance decay. So friction of distance, as a recap, this is as a cultural trait diffuses, the people who adopt it might alter it. So think of the game telephone or like stimulus diffusion. And things change over distance and over time. So the further away you get from the hearth, the less likely it is to have that original form. So the idea of globalization goes hand in hand with contemporary cultural diffusion. So this is a trend toward increased cultural and economic connectedness between people, between businesses and organizations around the world, to where borders and barriers are not going to stop that connection. This is also goes hand in hand with the idea that we are not just connected, but interconnected. So, and a bit interdependent, where we depend on each other, especially economically. So, through which methods does popular culture diffuse? First and foremost, internet and technology. This includes social media, also relationships with other people and places, media, things like TV, streaming, movies, radio, podcasts. Politics is also another way that popular culture can diffuse elements of the economy, and then just this idea of urbanization and living in an urban center. So, for this idea of distance decay in combination with globalization, now we have something called time-space compression or time-space convergence. Some places will reference it as convergence. And this image should be familiar to you guys. So this is the shrinking of the world due to improvements in communication and transportation technologies. This is kind of like the exception to distance decay. This also facilitates cultural convergence and widespread diffusion of popular culture. So places are closer together, right? The world feels or seems smaller because we have way more communication now that is instantaneous. So this idea of cultural convergence, this is the process of two or more cultures coming into contact with each other and adopting each other's traits to where they begin to be a little bit more alike. So it's almost like meeting in the middle. We see this through world sports, through K-pop. K-pop is a really good example of that. McDonald's and language. So, and just like a fun little question here, why aren't any cheeseburgers on the menu in Israel? So you can answer that in your notes. What are the results of widespread diffusion of culture? So the results of time-space convergence and widespread diffusion of popular culture are loss of indigenous languages and traditional cultures. So we start to see kind of like pop culture taking over or urban culture taking over, to where there's not as much diffusion of indigenous language. There's not the need to learn indigenous language. So more and more people are learning lingua francas rather than maybe their small folk language or local language. Same thing with traditions. Traditions now often will have a pop culture element to it, as opposed to maybe local cultures or local communities having small and very unique traditions. People tend to adopt pop culture. So, of about 5,000 to 6,000 languages being spoken today, only about half of those will remain in existence in 100 years. So, we see this dying of languages. For the extinction of languages and cultures. Some of these causes include things like genocide, which is the particular target and murdering of people of a particular group. So that is probably one of the most obvious ones, but also pressure of globalization and cultural convergence, as I was just mentioning. We also see in some instances, historical especially, laws against the use of indigenous languages. So this is done to try to assimilate or force assimilate certain populations into a larger population. So some examples include Turkey, where the Kurdish population are outlawed by the government to print or formally teach their language. So they are taking away that cultural element from them and forcing them to adopt the larger or more popular official language. We also saw this in the US with Native Americans. There's something called orphan trains where children would be taken away from their native families and put on trains and sent to large cities along the East Coast. And that was done in order to separate them from their parents and also their older community members, to where they did not get those traditions and language passed down to them. So it forced assimilate them into American culture. We also have something called cultural divergence. This is when cultures become less alike due to either cultural or physical barriers. The process of a culture restricting contact with other cultures in an attempt to retain its originality. So this is done consciously. It tries to separate and distinguish their culture from the mainstream. It's seen as a way to protect their community members. It's seen as a way to protect their culture. They do not want participation within larger culture or within urban culture or within pop culture. So one example is the Amish. These are communities throughout US, and they choose to live in isolation away from larger urban areas. Many different Amish communities will actually not even use electricity and other modern technologies. Some Amish communities do from time to time, or limited use, but this is all founded in the idea of trying to retain their own culture. So as a little recap, cultural ideas and practices are socially constructed and changed through both small-scale and large-scale processes, such as urbanization and globalization. These processes come to bear on culture through media, technological change, politics, economics, and also social relationships. Communication technologies, such as the internet and time-space convergence, are reshaping and accelerating interactions among people, changing cultural practices, as in the increasing of the use of English and the loss of indigenous languages. This also creates cultural convergence, as well as few instances of cultural divergence.